Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, host of the Praxi Pod. And today we have, after much malarking around, we have actually Mr. Ali Khan. How are you, Ali?
I'm well, Andrew. Thank you. How are you?
It's good to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
And all I was going to say was that actually, I know you're obviously you're the other side of the pond, right? But it's actually a pleasure to have you on the show because I know we're going to have a really good conversation today. Because every time we've met over the last number of period of time, it turns like a half an hour slot. It's a very intense half an hour slot.
Yeah, no, we've definitely had some good conversations, and usually not about the stated topic. So we'll try to.
No, you see, who knows where this will go today? Actually, because I know when we were speaking last week, we went down into martial arts and stuff like that. But we're gonna today. The Praxi Pod is not about martial arts. Maybe in the future,
Not today. Not today.
But it's about data. It's about this thing called AI, which obviously is buzzing around, and it'll never catch on. And then obviously people are now, in the last 18 months, have obviously jumped onto this thing called Gen AI, machine learning, all this kind of stuff. And that's why I wanted to get Ali on the show, because obviously he's a very experienced individual and leader in this space. Getting his perspectives and getting to share those for other people that are listening to the show we just thought would be a really good idea. So, and one of the things I actually noticed is 3 days ago, shock horror, which is 3 days ago, which is like Friday. Yeah, you got a special award, didn't you? I believe you got. I don't know if you got a trophy or something like that. Or they sent you a bar of chocolate. What was that you got?
Yeah, it's CDO magazine. So they're very kind. They're very active. One of the sort of professional institutions, organizations here. They do a lot of sort of networking and events, really for the CDO role, and they're really focused on that. Obviously, as the name suggests. Yeah, so it was just honored to get an award to be one of the top leaders, which really is it's not humble brag, but really, there's some very, very strong people out there, and so to be included in that, it really is an honor, and CDO magazine, I've had a very fruitful sort of collaboration with them, done sort of various events with them. They're a great sort of facilitator for our profession, really.
No, that's cool. That's good. I mean, really timely. I mean, obviously, they called me on Friday and said, look, I know you've got Ali on the show next week. We're going to give him this award today. No, I'm joking. No, it's cool. I mean, it's getting recognized because people are working so hard these days on all this data and stuff like that, AI stuff. And there's a lot of pressure I would, expect from the board. Like how can we, leverage this new opportunity, this new wave that's going on. So actually getting the recognition for the things you're doing is testament to what you've been doing. And there's nothing wrong with having a fellow Brit on the call, you see, as well. So, what with his mug of tea or coffee or whatever he's drinking.
Coffee now, because I've sort of come sort of transatlantic.
You're mellowed now.
So I have a tea and a coffee every day. Got one foot in each sort of tradition. I do appreciate CDO magazine. Again, this is going to sound like a humble brag, but it's not about me actually or the other individuals who get the award, right? Like that, yes, that's nice and everything. What they do that is so important is I think they raise the profile of the right, and the CDO role still is not quite as set in the constellation of C-suite positions as other ones. Obviously not as much as the COO or the CFO. Everybody understands what those are, right? They're well sort of defined and sort of set and even the CISO role, right? So I have a lot of friends who are CISOs. So I think there's a good understanding of the CISO role, right? Here's a role that is responsible for security across the enterprise, whether it's digital security, physical security, sort of security is everyone's responsibility, right? But it's specifically the responsibility, the leadership, the thought leadership, the systems, the processes, all of that. There's that accountability. I don't think in most companies, in most enterprises, I think it's fair to say there's that same level of understanding about data. Certainly in some organizations there is that are very mature, and those are usually sort of data first companies that have just grown up around data, maybe some of the better known sort of larger companies, right? But for most enterprises, I think it's still that age old problem of viewing data through this BU lens, right? And a lot of that has to do with people have good intentions, right? But a lot of it has to do with just how that data is monetized, where the ownership and value of that data is perceived from being, and And if you ask a lot of people, they'll say, well, of course, it's data first and enterprise data, but do we have the organizational structure, and sort of other things in place that really make that a reality? So I think that's a challenge for the CDO profession, in general. And so this is why I appreciate, CDO Magazine so much. So not so much about me or the other people individually. Yes, that's I appreciate that, but it's really raising awareness of what is a critical capability.
It's elevating the strategic impact of getting it right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I don't know if you. I'm part of this. I got invited and been on a few sessions with some very, very good people. It's called Data Leaders. I don't know if you've heard of it. Actually, it's run by Eden Smith out of the UK. But the people are, geographically dispersed. I don't know if you know Wade Munsey. Wade Munsey was at GSK. You probably know Wade.
Yeah, I followed some of his work. Yeah.
Yeah. Then he went to McKinsey, and I think he just recently. Well, I think he's been in a while now. He's actually running data for Heathrow Airport, which is no mean feat. Can you imagine the amount of data that's being collected there?
Yeah.
Him and another guy called Ryan. He's actually the managing director of AI and data monetization at Currys, UK retail, UK electrical retail.
Electronics, yep.
Yeah. They ran a session about 3 weeks ago talking about CDOs are in trouble. That was literally the title of the discussion. And it was kind of like, what do you call it, Chatham House rules, where you're basically not supposed to record it or anything like that. It was a very, very vibrant conversation about that and about some of the history about where the CDO role come from. And obviously, depending on the person that's in that role, they may have a different type of heritage. But actually, the summary seemed to be is that, there is I won't say an identity crisis, but with the AI element and with the CIO role, and depending what type of size of organization you're in, it does create that kind of I suppose the way I'd abstract it to is it a line role? If I go back to my kind of corporate background, is it a line role or is it a transformation role? Yeah, so you transform the business to be more data centric, data first, all that kind of thing you just mentioned. And then is there a line role after that, or actually have you baked it into the organization structure of the future, so that role becomes redundant? Yeah, or is it actually a line exec role that will be there forever, to be the champion of that particular capability across the whole enterprise? So there was a very interesting debate about that. So I don't know what your view on that was.
Yeah, that's a very interesting. So of course, I believe it's both, right? But I think that there's sort of phases to this, right? So in roles that, in CDO or head of data sort of type roles, right? So I always have this belief that when you begin the role, right, unless you happen to, inherit a perfectly sort of baked data organization, which hardly ever happens, because then why would they hire someone? You want to sort of centralize a lot of the key capabilities. So I would say, the CDO sort of role has three aspects to it, right? There's the governance role, right, which is historically is sort of where a lot of this profession sort of came out of. There's the platform role, which includes operations, platform building, and all the rest of it. And there's the analytics or the analytics enablement role, right? And so those are sort of the three key elements, right, that you want to sort of address, and you probably want to centralize them in the beginning, right? And the reason you want to centralize them is because you want to get, commonality, right? Obviously around, the strategy and, also the platforms and just the processes, and just have everyone sort of ground in on the same way of thinking, right? But then, and that to me is a transformation, right? So that transformation may last, I don't know, 18 months or however long it lasts, right? And now you've got a good grasp on governance and compliance.
You got like a blueprint, basically. Then you got like a blueprint, yeah.
Strategy that you've sort of
playbook
carried out, right? You've got this roadmap for transformation. You've got everyone on the same page. You've got common platforms, right? So core data platforms, machine learning infrastructure, whatever it may be for serving recommendations out, for example. And you've got analytics, right? Analytics enablement, right? So you've got all these things. But then that's sort of the transformational part. But for me, the goal is not to continually sort of build this massive nexus, right? This sort of empire of data, right? That what's most important is what is the level of analytic capability throughout the organization. So you've
Well, like
centralized.
what's the maturity level, you mean?
What's the maturity level? Right, exactly, right. So you've centralized these capabilities to strengthen them and to get everyone on the same page. But now you want to fan out, right? You want to fan out the analytics capability, right? You want to fan out the data scientists, you want to fan out the analysts, all these folks throughout all of the business.
So
Now, to some
so
degree,
like you mean you embed them
yeah,
into
you
the
want to embed them
functions.
and you want to
Yeah,
have
okay.
them actually
Yeah.
reporting into the business, right? And then you want the business to hire people directly, because now, you hire, an analyst, you hire a data scientist. They already have there's a common bedrock of metadata, of governance, right? There's a common bedrock of platform. There's a common way of doing things operationally. So you don't have this chaos where everyone's just sort of hiring left and right and everyone's building their own platforms and doing things their own way, and now things don't match up
Yeah,
and
because it can be very fragmented if you don't
can be very fragmented.
organize it.
And so now we've sort of moved from this pure transformation role into more of a line management role, where that core of governance and platform never really goes away, right? I mean, you still have to operate that. You may operate now. My preference, because I've never been a person who measures my progress by the size of team, right? Like that's a very poor metric in my mind, right? And it can lead to all kinds of negative things.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, yeah. So, so
That's talking candidly. That's not always the same view for everybody, is it?
I know, I know, I know.
Because
This is
obviously
this is a
budget and headcount can become an increasingly interesting
no, I know,
dimension.
I know. I mean, maybe we'll get into this topic, but for me, senior leaders of any kind should be measured by impact, right? Not by size of the organization. I mean, I've seen you know at some sort of corporation many years ago, right? Where that can become a negative, right? That can become a negative factor. So okay, so I'm a director, right? And I've got 100 people, right? And I should really decommission this technology, right? But I know if I decommission it, that's going to reduce 20 people in the org or something, or they're going to have to go somewhere else. Okay. And now if someone's saying, well, why is he a director? He's only got 80 people or something, now I'm incentivized to empire build, right? In a very suboptimal way, right? To sort of preserve my own, and this is why I think it's so detrimental to think in those terms, right? I mean, I've simplified that thing, but anyway, coming back to what we are saying. So I think there's a transformational aspect to it and a line management act to it. It's not that the transformation, once you're done and everyone's sort of in sync, and now you've got your data scientists throughout the org and everyone, you've raised the level of analytics throughout the org. It's not like you're done. There will be another transformation. There should be another transformation. If you're truly a data centric org, then it's not a one and done, right? So maybe the opportunity of AI, that becomes like your next transformation. Now again, you may centralize some talent. Again, you may bring in some new talent, right? And now you'll sort of do the next sort of generation of transformational capability, right? You will continue what you already
I mean,
have.
it's a bit like an S curve for the organization, isn't it? You're
It
going
is,
through an
it
S
is.
curve
And
of
so I mean that I mean, just again, I liken it to the CISO role, and I have a lot of respect for our colleagues in security, and I've sort of grown up in and around very compliance centric and very sort of secure environments, in banking and telecoms and things like that, and so I have a tremendous respect. And I think what they have done very well, which we sort of need to emulate, is no one questions, right? Is the CISO role, temporary? Like, do we not need a CISO now after, like, as far as I know, and maybe I could be wrong on this, but at least my CISO friends don't seem to have this problem, because everyone understands that security is an ongoing, permanent consideration, whether you are doing a transformation or line management, like that is non-negotiable. For me,
were you thinking
data is a first,
you thinking about quantum, right? I mean, I had Steve Suarez on. I don't know if you know Steve from HSBC on the show a while ago. He was talking about he did quantum and some big initiatives at HSBC. You look at the quantum stuff. There's a massive implication for security there. Huge,
yeah,
absolutely
absolutely.
huge.
Yeah.
Because it just changes the paradigm shift of. So I think the point you're making is that, and we could talk about this, but the amount of the pace of change in tech and the implications on the business need senior people to man mark these capabilities and competencies. Otherwise, you're gonna be exposed, or you're running a risk, aren't you? You're running a risk of, you can't, I don't want to use that phrase again, but that the data is a very important asset, and security is a very important capability. I mean, I think
Exactly.
that's what you're saying, is you're elevating it to that level of
Yeah, absolutely. It's that first class citizen amongst concerns, right? I mean, why are we in this profession, right? Data is ultimately about one thing, which is making better decisions, right? Delivering value to the business. Like that's why. So when is that not a concern, right? When do you not want to make? It's something that to me it even sort of transcends like immediate technical things. I mean, technology is sort of an enabler, but if there was some sort of a solar flare and all the computers and everything went up in smoke, right? You still need like intelligence, right? You still need intelligence and information to run the business. So to me, data is as fundamental as finance, security, operations, or any of those other, or even technology itself, right? It's just one of those core things. And so if you're, but people tend to not always think of it in that way, and that's what I'm passionate about. I do believe in this profession, right, and this type of role, and I think we still have a lot of work to do.
And is a good question? Is that you talking about decision making, right? We talk about the what is it? Making the a factual data driven decision versus at a board level a gut decision,
Mm.
yeah, which maybe doesn't have any tangible facts behind it, but that executive thinks that in their gut, because of their experience, because they've been in the industry for 30 years, that's the answer. When actually the data, or either
Yeah.
the data is not available, or it is available and it gives a different answer. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's yeah, first of all, I have a lot of respect for gut decisions, right? I think that's real, and I rely on that. I rely on my sort of gut, and there's a lot of research around how sort of gut decisions, which seemingly come from some mysterious place, are actually data and experience based within the human frame, right? So it's just that the process by
It's
which
like a
they
fusion. It's like a fusion, isn't it, of
yeah, the
actual
process by which it
experience.
arrives is not immediately obvious, right? And so that's why you have these sort of leaps of intuition or a sudden insight or some gut feeling. No, it's actually the result of. But no, I have a tremendous amount of respect for that. But in my experience, it's very interesting. So years ago, and I don't mind mentioning, so Scholastic, right? Wonderful company, absolutely fun place to. I loved my time there. That came in my career after a very long stint in financial services, and I was looking for something different. This is right after to 2000, 2007, 2008, that whole sort of episode, right? So I wanted to do something, and the criteria that I had is I want to work at somewhere where I could explain to my mother you know what it is that I do. Talk
Oh, you could
about
do the mom test.
exotic, financial products or anything, with all due respect to the places that I worked, right? And so selling children's books is great, and I have four kids. My boys, two boys are older. At that time, they got to say, my dad works at Harry Potter, so briefly cool, right? So I like that place for all kinds of reasons. Man, talk about embedded institutional wisdom, right? I mean, you think about this place, this company at that time was about 90 years old, right? 100 years old. They just celebrated their centennial. At that time, had only had two CEOs. That the founder and his son, Dick Robinson, who's he passed a few years ago. What wonderful human being, wonderful guy, right? Really an honor to sort of speak with him, a few times. Okay, now you have here career teachers, head teachers, educational psychologists, 40 years of experience in schools and education and publishing and all these things. I mean, they know their stuff cold. They absolutely, and think about it. I mean, they're the number one at what they do in the world, right? The number one children's publisher. They've nailed it. Harry Potter, you name it, right? Okay, now, so we roll out. I get to hire the first data scientist and machine learning engineers, what we now call machine learning engineers, and we've done this sort of transformation project and built their very first cloud data warehouse and things like that in AWS very early days. And now we're going on this journey of predictive analytics and so on, right? And so this exact question comes up, right? Like, so we have all these predictive and lots of things like, what should be, whether it's at the individual child level, like what's the right thing for the child, or what are the right things to put together in the warehouse, or what are the right things to market together, all these kinds of
like all the hierarchies and the ISBNs and all that kind of stuff.
all of that, right? And all of these have been done by people who are like very deep experts, right? And have done very well, right? And so, so we've got our first sort of batch of models, and like they're not very good, right? They're not that good, right? Because we're still figuring all of this out, right? This new domain, and sort of working out all the chinks and things like that. And, okay, so then there's like, okay, this was not very good. Maybe there's something interesting. We knew it was not that good. Okay, so very, very quickly, quickly improving. The quality is improving. The quality of the models is improving. The data is improving. More importantly, right? Okay, now fast forward, a couple of months or something, and we're getting recommendations out of the systems that accord with what the experts had sort of come to themselves. You know what I mean? And we applied some of this retroactively and said, well, look, it's almost as smart as you, right? In these decisions. And they're like, yeah, okay, well, it's not bad. I guess it's okay. It's not so bad, right? If it comes to the same sort of decision as me. And I'm simplifying dozens of conversations, right? And soon enough, there's now non-obvious recommendations that are coming out of the models. Like, why don't you put together, something about summer and something about sports? I mean, maybe that's not, it doesn't sound completely wild, but maybe it's something that a human being hadn't come up together at that point, yet. And now it's coming up with things that those folks had not come up with, and they're like, okay, we've learned to sort of trust it because it accorded with the things that we had recommended, so it can't be that totally useless. And now it's actually so there's this sort of educating process, that you have to go through.
I didn't know where that story was going to go. I wasn't sure whether you were going to say that one night the people had come in and they torched the data center because they were coming up with too good answers. A bit like the kind of the mill owners, with the kind of smashing the machines and stuff like that.
No, it's so I think, look, it's part of our job, right, as sort of analytics leaders and data leaders to take our colleagues on that journey and be I'm very respectful of that gut instinct, because
it's a tacit knowledge, isn't it? It's a tacit knowledge.
It is a tacit knowledge, and just because you don't know the specific steps that are gone through to arrive at that, I don't think it's not valid. But at the same time, sort of demonstrating the output from the machine has value is something that we need to take our colleagues on that journey. And ultimately, I mean, and we're seeing this now, right? This sort of hybrid or augmented organization, right, where you have the human instinct, and human oversight sort of guiding the things that are coming out of AI, potentially gives us the sort of best of both worlds.
Yes, that's great. That's a great example. It actually took me back in my history to when I left SAP. The first customer that I worked with was Oxford University Press. Right, obviously part of Oxford University. Oh my God, talk about the corridors there and the books they have there. It's like unbelievable. And obviously the people there were just absolutely fantastic. The apps, they're so knowledgeable and so just such a great culture. They were absolutely amazing, very diligent, very professional, very accurate, precise, very collaborative, great, experience. In fact, the team that I had there they wanted to stay there. Basically, it was such a great place to work.
It sounds like it's probably a place very, very intellectually stimulating. Right?
Yeah, no, exactly. But they were genuinely wanted to, they wanted to be helped in these certain areas. But they also, were also very open to, there wasn't a barrier. So I suppose, sometimes when you put change in as a barrier to change, they were like saying, help us to change, help us to transform, which is really interesting. Cool. No, you touched. I suppose you took. So the great story. Thanks for sharing that. I think the bit that you start to segue into this was this thing about AI. Then, right? So, we talk about the data. We talk about the CDO role. What is since November 2022, I presume, where you've been operating. What's been your take on that? I mean, it's it seems there's kind of LLM LLM model kind of, competition last year, league tables, blah, 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 blah. What's your now? It seems, I don't know. I don't know. It's not calmed down. I mean, last week it seemed to be mad. Last week with more and more stuff that every week seems to be like madness. Not madness in I'm not saying in a bad way, in a kind of just a crazy way. They're just a matter of things that are happening. What's your take on what's been going on? I suppose it's also that thing about curating through all the hype and all the tsunami to work out how you can apply it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, how lucky are we, Andrew? Right? We get to sort of, I mean, so I grew up watching, Star Trek, right? And my dad was a Star Trek fan, right? I'm a Star Trek fan, right? My kids to greater or lesser degree, and so, you sort of ask, computer, tell me this, computer, tell me that, where's this, what's that? You ask it just about any old thing, and it gives you a perfectly well, and we're approaching that point, aren't we? And isn't it amazing, to sort of go from watching something, sort of on screen that seems sort of very far away to something that's a reality now. So I'm absolutely fascinated by this area. Actually, so I have a personal interest here as well, right? Which is so when I was so when I was 15 or something, I'd read about Eliza, this thing that was written in the 60s. It was basically a chatbot that was sort of like a therapist, and just sort of reflected back, like, I'm very sad today. Well, why are you sad today? Well, because I had these feelings. Well, what kind of feelings did you have? And but it seems like it's sort of talking to you, right, at a very basic level, right? And I can't remember where I read about it, but I thought, okay, well, I can make something like that. So what do I know about? So I know about science fiction. British science fiction shows, right? So there's Doctor Who and all the rest of it. Blake Seven, if you probably know what that is, right? And so I wrote this very basic chatbot, right? In Basic, some flavor of Basic that was a bit better than Basic. And my at that time 9-year-old sister, so I said, look, hey, well, look, we've got this robot, you can talk to it. So I cheated a bit on the Turing test because I sort of already sort of primed her and also used it on a non-adult, right? But she was convinced, and this thing, and she would, like, and I said, it only knows about science fiction. You can only talk about science fiction to it. And she would say, oh, okay, what about Doctor Who? And it would start talking about Daleks, and it would ask a question, and she would, and it was just very simple sort of pattern matching on certain keywords, and then it would riff off of those, and very bait them. So I was convinced at 15 that I'd sort of cracked the Turing test, right? And so now fast forward many decades, and the Turing test has in fact been cracked as of last year, right? Not that you could argue, well, the Turing test is more a test of human gullibility than it is of actual, like, machine intelligence, and certainly that's the truth. But nonetheless, up until last year, you could probably very quickly tell that you're talking to a machine, and now it's not so obvious. The majority of people, and I think it was OpenAI, and maybe it was version 4 of their model.
Oh, you mean like the human-like interaction on the reasoning and the interaction and the communication, right? Okay, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So they did some sort of a study, and 83%, or don't quote me, whatever it was, but the vast majority of the folks thought that they were talking to a real human. And so it's fascinating to me on a personal level that we've reached that level. Now, coming back to the business context, that's all very interesting, right? But what does it mean for a business, right? And so we have a great friend in common, right? Idosa, right? Idosa Odaro, right? So he's the number one guy who talks about value, business value, and this is something that I take from him as a great sort of mentoring point. And that is the right question to have. Like, this is fascinating to people who are interested in this sort of thing, right? Like us. But what's the value for the business? How do we really sort of show that and prove that, right? And so one of my first discussions with, I mean, executives or peers or just industry people anywhere really is, okay, so I know you want to do this thing. I know you want to you want to have an AI thing, right? Okay, great. We can do that for you. We can build that. But do you understand that you're introducing risk and uncertainty into a process where previously perhaps there was none, right? Like, do you understand that first, right? Because you're not very exciting existing, sort of decision tree based, deterministic, thing, actually works perfectly. You can't game it, you can't break it. it's compliant. It just works, right? It just has to work. Now this thing may not work. Right?
I mean, so you mean the thing about it's because it's been battle tested and it's kind of like it's
Yeah. I mean,
fairly
it's
bulletproof.
well, it can only go so many paths. It can only go so many directions, right? It's true or false, right? It's going to go this way or that way.
Functionally boxed off effectively.
It,
Yeah, okay.
it's complete, and you know exactly how it's going to behave, you know, short of some system failure, right? It's going to behave absolutely predictably, right? And now you've introduced an element of unpredictability, right? That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you have to be aware of what you're introducing now, because nothing is completely watertight, right? You know,
Yeah,
I believe,
so the
right?
precision is not guaranteed, and sometimes.
Not 100%. I mean, there's things you can do to ameliorate that, right?
Mm.
Certain approaches you can do to make those responses more retrieval sort of driven, as opposed to on the fly generated, and you can put in all kinds of guardrails, and those things really need to go down to the code level. But nonetheless, this is an emerging area, right? So there are I have colleagues of mine, and people that I know who are go to conferences, and people are this sort of prompt injection attacks, right? This is a real thing, and you think, okay, yeah, my chatbot is really locked down and it's super. No, it's not. This is not. This is a probabilistic process at some level, and I don't believe it's completely secured or completely solved or completely understood in the vast majority of cases. So I think that's thing one to understand, right?
I think
And
a
just be
quick
aware.
question. Quick question on that would be: who's driving that conversation? Is it the business asking a leader like yourself to say, "We've got to get into this AI stuff. We've got to work
Yeah,
out,"
yeah.
or is it
Some of it
or is it you trying to say potentially we come across some capability which we could improve the existing process with, or is it kind of a bit of
No,
both?
I think right now, it really, and I think it's healthy. What I've seen at organizations that I've you know, worked at, or even from sort of colleagues, is there's a very broad interest, right? So ideas come from data and IT. They come from various business functions. And that's good. There's a process of sort of discovery and learning and all of that. However, I think it behooves us, as the people who are supposed to be, the experts on data and AI, right, to help sort of, uncover some of these realities. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean that you don't do these things. It's just that you go in with both eyes open. You have to understand that, you are introducing sort of an element of risk here, right? And so, okay, once that's understood, then you need to go to, so what's the thing that's driving, what's actually going to change the bottom line here, right? Now, some of these things are, there may not be sort of an immediate kind of payoff in the sense of increased revenue or save costs or whatever. It may just be that the customer now just expects this as a baseline capability. Like, if you don't have a mobile app now, you know what I mean? Like, my gas company doesn't have a mobile. Like, it's so annoying. I can't remember my password. I have to go and log into the website, and all these things. You just stick out like a sore thumb now. If you don't have that, right? Years ago, it was if you didn't have a website or whatever. Now it's
So yeah,
mobile.
so what you're saying is that there's also an increasing customer expectation of leveling up.
Yeah, right. I think so. And so, so some of that is just, if you don't have it now, it's just table stakes. Like, you have to have it, right? So, okay, and that is a perfectly legitimate reason to do that, to not sort of fall behind. But beyond that,
Well, I mean,
there are,
that's that's the kind of classic case of what I call it, the triple crown, isn't it? It's like increase revenue, reduce costs, or improve service.
yeah,
You're talking to the last one, improve customer experience.
yeah, absolutely, right. And so that, but then, there are, and you need to really sort of thoroughly sort of vet these, right? And I've been lucky to be involved with a couple of these where you've like, okay, you have a very clear understanding of the metric that you want to drive. So, okay, you want to increase revenue. Well, of course, everybody wants to increase revenue, but it's like, specifically, what does that mean? Like, what does that specifically mean, right? Well, okay, I want to have an increase in the folks who accept this type of recommendation or this type of thing on their journey for this type of product. Okay, good. Or I want to reduce costs. Well, okay, I have people in the call center who spend this long looking for answers, and I have to pay them because I pay them by their time. And if I could reduce that time, I reduce the amount
Yeah, you're handling
I
times down.
cost, and I
Yeah,
also improve customer service. I get two for one there, right? Because now Andrew calls, he's upset, and instead of, Ali works at the call center, and it takes me 5 minutes to find the answer, and he's waiting for another 5 minutes. He's already upset. But what if I could reduce that to 30 seconds? Now
Yeah, and he may have already been on the queue for 45 minutes or whatever.
exactly, and that translates into a cost saving. And so I think, and this is not just about AI. This is just a data strategy thing in general, which is data strategy is not sort of its own thing, right? It is the business strategy through data means, right? And so having alignment on those metrics and those goals is absolutely sort of key. And now everyone's speaking the same language and driving toward the same thing. And so yeah, I mean, the thing that gives me
Just a quick question: is there a bit of FOMO going on though? There's also a bit of FOMO, where people have fear of missing out on the AI wave and not making the right decisions
yeah,
about
yeah.
investments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is there a bit
So,
of
so
hype around
I
that?
think so. I think the FOMO's of a couple of flavors. One is this sort of, I think, whether it's the board or investors or the media. So everyone's asking company leaders about this thing, and I don't say that to dismiss it. Like that is real, right? I mean, it's as a legitimate question
Yeah,
as what is.
it's gonna be on earnings calls, isn't it?
Exactly, it is. We're beginning to see that, right? This is as a legitimate question as we would have asked a few years ago, or even now. Sometimes, what's your mobile strategy? What's your digital strategy? What's your internet strategy before that? Like these are all valid things because it's the opening of a new channel or a new paradigm or a new accelerator. So I don't see those things as invalid, right? But the more sort of focused FOMO, if that is a thing, is we are beginning to see companies drive like real value with real use cases, right? And typically that has come. It doesn't come that easily. Like there's a lot of work that has to happen, and people tend to underestimate this. You mentioned about the model race. Yes, the model is important, and recently we have seen real improvements in this sort of ability to apparently chain together discrete sort of thoughts right in the process into something that seems coherent, increase sort of memory and recall and
Oh, like
things like
the chain of
chain
thought
of
kind of
thought reasoning.
workflow. Yeah, yeah.
It's moving remarkably quickly. We see that. And I'm not saying the model doesn't matter, right? But it's like, it's putting if you put a Ferrari engine in a Mini, I like both of those cars, but it's not just about the engine. The engine's only going to get you so far, right? By far, and this is where data leadership comes in. By far, the biggest consideration is the data, right? The availability and the quality and the format and the applicability of and the management of the data, right? That is what is machine learning anyway? What is it, right? It's software that learns from data, right? The more data it has, right? And the more examples it has, the better
With
it's
some
going to
human
be.
insight, with some human input as well at some point.
Some human input and oversight as well, for sure, right? And so that reinforcement of human learning and that oversight, is absolutely critical. But that's really where we sort of need to lean in. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's a bit scary to me as someone who has been sort of a kind of a sort of a dabbler in this sort of thing and had a keen interest in sort of machine intelligence for a long time, to see how quickly it's advancing. It's
I mean, one of the things that triggered in my head when you were just talking though was about with the models and with this kind of, I suppose there's a certain element of black box to it as well. Yeah, is how do you validate it? How do you, because also there's this thing about the transform model, which is the kind of the paradigm shift that happened. It's like it's a probability machine basically, isn't it? It's basically deciding which is the next, the next, and not the next best action, but it's basically
yeah.
the next logical thing it should do as part of the transformer model. That's
Yeah,
my
yeah,
understanding of
and
what it's
that's why
doing.
sometimes you don't get the same answer twice from the same input, right? I mean, this is something you can play with at home, right? You can ask something and then re-ask it or ask a different model and get a different answer from the exact same prompt, right? And because yes, it is a probabilistic process. You could have the same input and the same model and still get the same answer, like or a different answer twice in a row, right? So yeah,
But that takes you into kind of like an interesting area, because obviously on the structured data side, you can usually be pretty precise. You can be precise because it's a database, isn't it? But then you've got this kind of knowledge graph, LLM, vector store,
yeah, yeah,
RAG. It's a real it's a new set of capabilities, although it's been out for a while. But they're all kind of coming together, and it's also, I presume, it raises a skills issue as well, isn't it? About how do you How do you work through all this stuff? Is that what you found as well?
Yeah. So a lot, several sort of things to unpack there. So yeah, so you are sort of having this sort of probabilistic process now, and you said, well, how do you know it's correct, right? So trying to figure out the steps that it has taken to arrive at a conclusion is pretty impossible, and what was impossible even before the transformer era, right? I mean, if you're challenged to sort of explain how this neural network got to this answer, they're already way too complex to actually sort of have that level of explainability or interpretability. Like, that is a real challenge in the domain, right? So there's this sort of, okay, so then what do, right? I mean, you can do a couple of things. One is you judge by the output. You measure the output, right? So you just say, okay, you know what? If I cannot figure out, because I mean, if we really, I spent a lot of time thinking and something talking about AI ethics and about bias and about things like that. I mean, if we really wanted to do this perfectly, we would say, you know what? I'm not going to have any customer impacting model that isn't fully explainable. But then you'd have to shut down 90% of your models in production. And that's just the reality. They're already like way too complex, right? So, okay, so you can't do that realistically in a business context, right? What can you do? You can look at the outputs, right? You have to look at the outputs. You have to pre-look at the outputs.
Is this like a reconciliation type of analogy? Is that what you do?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I haven't had described like that, but yes, not exactly reconciliation, because like in reconciliation, like you already have sort of like a
Like a
the number's
control,
five.
you have a control
Okay,
point.
the system
Yeah.
gives me five. It may not be five. It may be more like, okay, it's given me five. Is five within the realms of reasonability? Because I expected a number between 4 and 7. Yeah, okay, five's okay, right? So it's not quite a reconciliation in that sense, but yes, it is a checking of the answer that it gave. Is that a reasonable answer? Is that in line with what I would expect, right? Now, you may say to me, well, that's all fine and good, Ali, but are you sitting there checking the outputs of like hundreds of models continuously as a human being and saying this is okay, this is not okay? No, you're not, right? There is this sort of idea of constitutional AI, right? So Anthropic is the thought leader in this space, where you actually have, AIs that uphold a constitution, right? Or a set of laws, right? That they will judge the output of this other agent or AI against. So that's a very interesting approach that I'm still sort of researching and learning about. And it seems like that would be one way.
That's how you put the guardrails around it, basically, or the
That
principles
is
around
one
it.
way that you put guardrails around it. And so, yeah, I think I don't know. I've talked to sort of academics and researchers in the explainability space. There's a lot of challenges there. There are some interesting approaches there that will tell you, okay, and this is more sort of detecting bias, right? So, okay, what was the input of like this variable on this
So
output?
what was it trained on, and what was it
Well,
weighted
well,
on?
what was it trained on, but also specifically, like, what's it looking at, right? Is there some sort of hidden bias there, right? So the classic example is, well, of course you exclude, race and gender and things like that, but what if you include zip code, right? That's a classic one. Or what if you include certain buying habits? Is that a proxy for gender or for race or something else? And now you more of your decisions are sort of
Because some of those things on like Mosaic and some of the models that you have is like it has a mapping to the segmentation, doesn't it, about what that
right,
implies
right. And again, this is not
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
this is not
interesting.
particular to AI and to transform models. This is machine
No,
learning in
no,
general.
you're right.
And
You're
it
right.
definitely applies to this area as well. And again,
Well,
coming back,
it amplifies it, doesn't it? It amplifies it
well,
more.
that's yeah, coming back to my my earlier point, like it actually could make it worse, right? Because whereas you've got a machine learning model, it's going to spit out some output. It's going to say, right, Andrew, you buy this thing or do this action or next best action is this or whatever it is. But it's going to give you a variable, and a specific output. Not quite sure what the chatbot will give you,
Yeah. What you're saying is the machine learning model will give you an absolute.
It will give you an absolute, right?
Yeah.
So one approach to sort of get started with this type of thing that I've sort of advocated is, okay, if you have a set of well-developed, well-behaved machine learning models where you have a robust set of measures in to check for bias, for example, you can check the outputs against a data set that has race and gender and all the rest of it. and see like, okay, how does this behave? If I have the model with these same sort of things running on both sides, is it the same? Is it different? Okay, so I've got all these things in place. I'm checking for bias. I trust these models to be generally well behaved. Take the outputs of those and use that basically as your RAG for the LLM, right? Because now you've sort of reduced the risk of really errant outputs by leveraging your years long investment in really robust machine learning models, but you've put it in the frame of an LLM, which is perhaps what your customers expect, what your executive would love to have, what you'd like to get really strong on as a professional, right? And you've sort of brought those together. It's not perfect, but that is one approach for companies to sort of get started in this space
That's
without
great.
risking the Air Canada type of thing, where somehow managed to get a discount where it wasn't supposed to, and all these sort of things, right? Or a refund.
No, but that's actually from an investment point of view. That's actually it's like a fusion, isn't it? It's like you've taken your existing stuff and you've combined it with some new stuff, and you get a more, I don't know, a more robust, a more progressive model, a more progressive output. But that sounds pretty complex.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's not without it's not without effort.
Yeah, no, it's not. So AI is not some sort of fairy dust, right? I mean, although every vendor now is somehow an AI vendor. Every company, whether it's a consulting company or a product company or something in between, we're AI. We've always been AI.
Once you've
When
got
saying that it'll all be magic.
Ali, once you've got the domain extension, then it's obviously make it so. It's like
There you go.
Jean-Luc Picard, it's like make it so.
Make it so, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Beam me up, Ali, but not beam
yeah.
me up,
You asked
Scotty.
about skills, right? So very interesting, right? So this is another one of those sort of cyclical things where certain things become like quite mature in a space, and then there's sort of new elements again that need to be done. So I'll give you an example, like because I'm an old school data warehousing person, right? So you remember back in the day, you buy an Oracle or a Teradata, and it's got like everything. It's everything. It's your workload management, your querying engine, your everything you could ever want, right? It's all in one. You've got a team around it, and now you've got to go. Okay, so now you've got like the big data era. Now okay, so now these elements are less baked. They need, I mean, in the Hadoop era,
You got to put a bit of this and a bit of that, and
bit of this, a
to
bit of
split it
that,
together.
and now you need software engineers, right? Not just sort of more specialized data engineers are software engineers, but they're a particular specialized type. Now you need actually core software engineering skills that actually can write interfaces and tie these things together in a somewhat bespoke manner until AWS comes along and sort of matures these pieces, right? Takes all these open source projects and sort of makes them somewhat together. But even then, so we're in that same cycle.
So what you're saying is it's less turnkey. It's more you have to bring the components together and actually
It's
you
less
have to
turnkey. I
construct
mean,
it.
there are some companies that are doing a good job of that. Databricks is one of them. I think that quite sort of early to this, and they've got strong sort of pedigree, right, in open source and in data lakes and things like that. It's a good foundation. But yeah, I mean, there's that combination of people who have really good sort of data skills because you are concerned with data preparation, right? You still have data integration and data quality and all of these things still as valid as ever. You could argue even more important now, right? Because it's not just like Andrew gets a bad report and frowns at me the next day. It's that Andrew's a customer, and he gets some wrong
Well, I
information
mean,
here.
one of the things I was just thinking is because it links to that thing about because if in the data warehousing world, it's traditionally just structured data, yeah, with maybe some hierarchies. Now you've got in this whole Gen AI world, you've got forms, yeah, which could vary depending on what kind of industry you're in, but people are submitting things in forms, and also you've got all the unstructured data, which is also the stuff that's growing like that. And then you've got the things like, how do you join the dots between, to create a true customer 360 view of the world? It then starts to, I mean, that's a great use case, but also it's maybe more accessible, but it actually means you've got to attack it in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, I mean, look, the way I'd think about your question is there is sort of an evolution of skills, right? Of course, like your mind first goes to, okay, I need people who have worked in like natural language processing, and yes, you do need that. You need an injection, and so you talk to some people and they're like, oh yeah, I did that during my PhD. Well, okay, dust off those books and those papers and those brain cells because we need this now. There's some of that. There is what I would call by now sort of traditional data engineering skills to do with the ingestion and the processing and the making available for consumption of data. That doesn't go away, right? And there is a reliance on really sort of core software engineering skills, right? Because a lot of this is still sort of new. A lot of companies are still figuring this out, So yeah, I think it's a challenge, but not an insurmountable one. I think. See, the thing is if you have been in this area and you understand data and you've been through a few waves of change, then you understand that the fundamentals don't really go away, right? So there's always going to be a need for clean data. There's always going to be a need for metadata. There's always going to be a need for something like a SQL language. There's going to be a need for some sort of a sort of pre-calculated, data mart type. Like these things don't go away. In fact, they may
they kind of foundational, aren't they, as part of your design? And there's also it's like the automation. You've got to also got to think about what can you there's always that raging debate. What's real time?
Yeah.
And what's batch and what's automated and what's manual. It's all like those are kind of other decisions suppose you need to work through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer to those always is it depends, right? It depends on what the business needs. One of the great sort of sins of sort of engineering types like me is the you have to fight the urge to over engineer, right? And that's something that is a classic failing, right? So okay, I have my real time. No, why? Maybe the business doesn't need real time. Maybe it needs. Many systems are okay with a 15-minute micro batch. Like that's perfectly adequate. Yes, there are some things that are truly real time, and so you tend to see architectures that support both of those things. Everything that you over engineer, it can become like a real sort of burden around your neck in terms of.
I suppose that's the
cost
thing,
and
isn't it?
operations.
As you talked about before, is like the progression of the consumer expectation and the consumer apps that they're being used. They then, when they're in a B2B sense, sometimes they then expect the same level of maturity, the same level of experience.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you're sometimes not geared up for that.
Yep, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
We that was quite intense, that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we do go. Thanks. Yeah, no, you managed to ask me about a few things that I'm excited about.
So what, I mean, in terms of the future, we're now kind of nearly midway through 2025. What do you? I mean, I was blown away last week about Google I/O, Johnny Ive and OpenAI getting together, new OpenAI models, new Anthropic model. I mean, it's like a fire hose, and it's like
It is.
a tsunami. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is really difficult to keep up. It's sort of simultaneously sort of exciting and a bit worrying. I would say that like you consider like code quality, for example, or just coding, right? So you think of like the agents, for coding assistants, even like 6 months ago or something. So they're not that good, and there's been sort of industry wide studies of these things. So it's you ask it to create a basic website from scratch, and it does an okay job, and it's fine. Probably not something you go to mass production with, but good enough. But you ask it to add something to an existing software product, and it can, right? It can't punch its way out of a paper bag when it comes to things like that. But now OpenAI and Anthropic have both talked about sort of a fully capable software engineer, right? So basically, you can point it to a list of requirements, right? It will go and look at your existing code base. It will add all the code that it needs to. It will, check it in, test it, whatever, and write the documentation and completely autonomously, So like what does that mean now? And they say a year from now. And I you know what? Before I would have been very skeptical, and now I believe it, right? Because of the improvements that we've seen just in the last couple of months, right? It's really takes you back. And so like, what does that mean now, right? What does that mean? Like, what does it mean for me? Again, I think back to like big data, right? So the big data era and the cloud era, whereas it would have in the data warehouse era, I need a dozen people, right? I need 3 people to run the data warehouse, and I need 3 people to run the BI platform. I need a couple of people to write reports, and I need a couple of people to schlep data. My old boss used to call it data schlepping. Okay, I need a dozen people to set up this whole environment. Okay, fast forward a few years, one single developer can fire up an entire AWS environment with all the bits, and you need one competent developer can set up a whole scalable website, right? Okay, now fast forward, whereas before I would have needed maybe a 25 people to develop, whatever it is, what does it mean now to have two developers and 25 virtual or 20, 10 or 5, whatever, virtual AI engineers, right? Like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? Like I'm having trouble kind of conceptualizing, right, what it means, right? But I think the future is hybrid. That's what it is, right? So there's going to be this idea of the augmented sort of organization, right? Now, it doesn't mean that there's going to be sort of mass layoffs. There'll probably be some, as with any technological change. But you asked what's the future. I mean, one way this may pan out is I was reading last week about Moderna, the vaccine and pharma company. Okay, so they merged their IT and their HR department. This is fascinating to read about that, right? So, I mean, a year ago, you would not have predicted that, right? You wouldn't have thought, and why have they done it, right? They've done it because of they're anticipating, this sort of wave of human AI.
What you mean is, have they done like a skills and competencies? Then what does a human do and what does a machine do? Is that what they're working through
I
now?
think so, yeah. And so I've I'm fortunate to know a couple of really senior HR leaders, right? And I've sort of and they've been kind enough to sort of consult me and say like, hey, what should we be thinking about with this sort of coming of increasing AI competence, and almost invariably, I mean, their mind goes to logical things that we would also think about, like, okay, what does this mean? What does it mean for existing employees? What does it mean for future hiring? And so, yes, those things are relevant, right? But there's going to be entire new job families that are created, as a result of this, right? So it's going to be somebody's job to train the AIs, right, and to prepare the data for the AIs, and it's going to be somebody's job to oversee them, and I would like very much to see AI ethicist become like an actual job, and it's going to be someone's sort of job to do all these things. And what I hadn't anticipated was that the entire HR and IT department would merge. I hadn't thought that far ahead, so that really gave me pause, and that may be an increasing wave, regardless of what form it takes. I think that the future is hybrid, right? That you're going to see, and this is consistent with any other technological advance, right? I mean, all of these things that we do today in our working life, whether it's dealing with, files or writing things. All of these things were like manual processes, right? Not so just a few decades ago. And now everything is augmented with digital products. And
yeah, it's the next evolution stroke revolution.
Yeah, yeah. The thing that's a little bit different is it's not just replacing sort of mostly physical process. It's replacing the sort of some mental process. Now you might say
knowledge workers.
Knowledge workers, right? So you may say, well, we've always had calculators, we've always had, these things. And yes, it's true, but it's a little bit more now because it's getting into things that we thought only we could do well, And that's
it's interesting because I remember there was a few months ago there was Scott Galloway, who's the NYU
professor,
Prof G. He's hilarious. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
He's just so inappropriate sometimes, but anyway, he's just so funny.
Yeah, no, I've been following some of his stuff, yeah.
But he did they did section in school, his education company, they did a whole day on AI. And the guys from Moderna, there was a very senior exec from Moderna actually came and talked about, they didn't talk about what you just talked about, but they talked about how they've been embracing AI. And they were very, very progressive on it. They're really, really rethinking how they could change the organization model. So it sounds like it's actually happened. And the other thing I was just going to say was that back in late 23, when I was up in Copenhagen, there was an article by McKinsey, and it said literally that this stuff that's happening could advance the transformation of organizations by 10 years.
Mm.
Literally, transformation is like, literally you collapse it by 10 years. What your 5 and 10 year plan was, you can now do it next year, which is like, holy moly.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I'm flabbergasted, right? By the pace with which the improvement is happening. And yes, there are, again, there's this question of like, okay, where's the value and how are you leveraging it? But some are leveraging it well, and just the increase in the capability is just, I mean, it's accelerating, and I think it's exciting, but it's also kind of worrying because it's moving so quickly. I don't think we as a species, right, have quite figured out how to deal with this change. Not just on the societal sort of an economic level, but even at the ethical level. Like, what does this actually mean? And this is one of the reasons that I talk about AI ethics. Because I think it's talk about ethics always, but also because I'm scared, right? I'm worried, not in a sort of existential, Terminator kind of way. I'm not too worried about that, but I am worried about what this actually sort of means, And yeah, I mean, look, a lot of these things are
Well, and
commercially.
also the thing that rolled up to is that does that in your mind does that roll up to the kind of responsibility as well, responsible AI? I mean, I know there's that phrase, responsible AI, that you said. We talked about explainable AI. We talked about AI ethics. I think you talked about what did you talk about? What was the phrase you used when you talked about the anthropic stuff? You talked about the
But yeah,
constitute
constitutional AI. Yeah,
constitute.
it's an approach that they have to sort of monitor, sort of agent behavior, basically.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I suppose ultimately it's like how you fit the race, the accountability and the responsibility onto
Yeah.
that new infrastructure, into that new AI
Yeah,
infrastructure.
yeah. So I mean, like I did do I did a keynote recently about AI ethics, and I did talk about so some of this terminology is important, right? So there is a difference, right? So AI ethics, right, which is sort of the broad term. So this is just the application of ethics, right, to this domain. What's right, what's wrong, and the fundamental sort of considerations and how you arrive at what's right and what's wrong, right? Like there's debate there, right? So, and this is again, this is not just about AI, but is this based on the outputs, the outcomes, right? This is utilitarian sort of view, right? So hey, if the outcome is something that we want, then it's all fine. Like it doesn't, the means don't matter, right? It's the outcome, and what determines the outcomes, or is it rules based, right? Is it so this is very much the anthropic kind of, this is the Kantian or deontological kind of view, like, oh, you have a list of rules, do this, don't do that, do this, do that, or is it this, what's become very popular recently, this sort of idea of virtue ethics, right? It's not a new idea, it's a very old idea, that you sort of you cultivate like certain virtues, right? And that will lead you to make the right decisions in the right context, not just like a set of laws. Because what if you have a law like you never lie? Well, that's a good law, right? But what if you have to lie to save someone's life? Well, okay, well now you need wisdom, and you need ethics, right?
Yeah.
And
So what you're saying is it's not as black and white every time.
it's
There's
not as
some
black and
grey.
white. So one of the reasons I like talking about AI ethics is because it makes you think about ethics, and it makes you think about, well, what is the right thing to do? I have to figure that out first before I can even figure out how to apply it to AI. And so I think that's always the most important thing to talk about
But I mean,
as a
that links back to one of the very famous bit of literature that I got given in Copenhagen. Actually, back to my Viking roots, is actually the Vikings used to have this phrase called "Dorath,"
I've heard the phrase, but I don't know.
which is basically means do the right thing, which is
Oh
basically links
yes,
back to what you just said, really, isn't it? It's
yeah.
like it's maps back to ethics and back to
Do
virtue.
the right thing because it's the right thing. Yeah. So responsible AI then is a little different than that. Responsible AI is so you have ethics, right? We can decide our ethical framework. Okay, but then how do I actually put that into practice? Like, what does that mean? So I need policies, I need procedures, I need controls. So when people say responsible AI, that is what they mean. It's like the ethics in practice, and then
But
there's
how you enable the
how
ethics.
you enable the ethics. So if it just okay, so now we've arrived at ethics, but how do we actually? This is a living, breathing. Well, it's not literally living or breathing yet, but it's an actual active system, right? How do we actually apply those ethics to it? Then there's AI safety, right? And people sometimes you hear this sort of phrase, and that's very much about managing when things go wrong, right? So something happens. I've got a self-driving car. There's going to be an accident. How do I
What's
manage?
the fail safe?
What's the fail safe? And that's yes, exactly. Very much around safety and dealing with sort of errant sort of conditions and things like that, right? And so the term that ties all of these things together is AI governance, right? That's what I've sort of seen. So AI governance now is all of these things, within some a structure, there's some oversight, there's some accountability. So ethics is definitely the starting point. You know, responsible AI is what you do to put that into practice. AI safety is what you do to manage the things that fall out, right, of that. And governance is sort of the whole thing. And
The non-happy
there's-
path. The non-happy
yes, there's a
path.
couple of people online. I want to make sure I credit them, right? So Alan
Mm.
Robertson and Dion Wiggins. So these are folks in the sort of AI ethics and responsible AI space. I've been following and learning from their work, and they've done good work in sort of delineating this terminology, right? Because it is quite important.
And do they sit in academia or do they sit in the business?
They're practitioners, I think.
Right. Okay. When we can put their names in when we publish this episode. The one question it triggered when you were talking about that as the roll up, but who owns that? Who owns that in the business?
Who owns what?
Or in an organization, who owns AI governance and those kind of dimensions?
Yeah,
In your understanding.
So most companies now, well, I don't say most, but ones that I'm familiar with, many of them have sort of an AI council, right? I am not sure if that will remain the case, right? I think that's sort of a reactive response, and I'm not saying it's a wrong one. It's just there's this thing we need to,
It's like a tactical, like a
yeah, and right people, right? So you've got people in data and technology, and you've got some product people, and you've got compliance people, and so sort of various legal. You've got all the right people sort of represented, right? But I was reading this one book, and it was saying that it's only AI until it works, and then it becomes software. And that's true, right? Like AI is going to become ubiquitous, right? Like any other wave of technology previously. So whether you see it explicitly or you don't, it's there. And then it's going to make sort of less sense to just talk about this. And it will become part of just the overall risk and compliance that sort of, sits within, a company. But for now, I would say that whoever manages your data governance, right, is best suited to run AI governance. And I have reasons for that. And this is a topic of debate with some of my colleagues in the industry, right? I think that because AI is still mostly about data. AI ethics is mostly about data ethics, right? The behavior of AIs is mostly determined by the data that is fed to them, right? That is something that we have seen time and again. So in most enterprises and organizations, the primary concern for managing the behavior of AIs, which is what we're really talking about, is data. And the people who understand data best are the people who manage your data governance. So your chief data officer, your data office, your head of data, whatever it is, right? Whoever is managing data governance, I feel, I've advocated for this, should extend their sort of purview, or their purview should be extended to include AI as well. Those things are tied at the hip. Now, if you work at Anthropic, okay, or you work at some place where there's a sort of a different lens here, then you may have you justified in saying, okay, I have a completely separate sort of AI body or something. And I'm picking on Anthropic.
Oh, you mean but you're saying if there's no, if there's no precedent?
Yeah, yeah. Or if you're in a place where you consider your data problems like solved, right? Like you're purely building AI agents, and I mean, in any complex enterprise, the data problems are most definitely not solved, right? But if you're a startup, or you're in a smaller organization where you say, okay, look, my data's under control. I'm solving for one particular thing or a couple of things. I'm really focused primarily on the behavior of this agent, and my data problem is sort of solved, then you can sort of say, okay, there's a separate body or something like that. Most places I've worked, which is sort of medium and large enterprises, that is not the case. So I still think that data governance folks are the best to manage AI governance in this sort of period.
No, thanks for that. I mean that's, at least it means that you don't have to throw everything out of the window and then reconstruct it. I mean, there's a logical evolution there with what you're proposing.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Look, I mean,
you can leverage some things.
I'll admit my bias, right? I'm a data person, and so this is my sort of point of view. But I think that, look, the fundamentals of data, right, and data management do not change, but the lens through which you view them does change, right? And so this has happened again many times, right? It's happened with big data. When we had a massive increase in sort of online data, it happened again with mobile, even more data. It's happening again now with AI. I mean, and AI will become ubiquitous and will become normal, the way that big data has become normal and the way that mobile has become normal. Now, what that new normal looks like, I think we're still figuring that out, right? That may be quite a leap from what we're used to, but it will become normal. It will become part of the fabric of technology, software engineering, all of that. So yeah, where that takes us and what capabilities that gives us, potentially, transformative. But I think, as data people, we have to sort of keep that perspective, right? That it's not completely divorced from the reality that we've lived in. It's an accelerator, it's an expansion, it's a new lens, but those core things sort of remain the same and arguably even more important than before.
Cool. Well, I don't want to take you down another rabbit hole, but and I don't know how you're going to react to this, but you remember the famous Mark Andreessen quote?
Which one?
Software's eating the world. Yeah.
Was
And
in
then
the
obviously there was a new version of that was AI is eating software. Yeah, obviously over the last few years.
yeah. I think I've
I
heard
don't know if you've
that.
seen the latest one. There's been an MIT Sloan article, which we'll put in this episode when we publish it. I haven't read it in detail, but apparently philosophy is going to eat AI. So
Philosophy
you've
is
got
going to eat AI.
apparently.
Yeah, I wonder what that means, but
I'm not. I'm just throwing that in there as a last little kind of like little tidbit. And we
yeah,
can,
yeah. No, I mean, certainly there's a lot of discussions around ethics or moral philosophy and AI, right? It's I mean, to me, this really one of the reasons I'm enjoying engaging in this topic again is when I was at university, we had this class called the ethics of artificial intelligence, and it was by far my favorite class. It was very different, right? We had this ethics professor, was philosophy professor, small class, like a dozen people. Like, who signs up for these things? you know, right? And it was very, very sort of Socratic and very sort of debate based. This hard and soft AI and all these, and we would examine things like the trolley problem, this classic thing, this trolley hurtling toward five people, they're going to die or something. You can pull a lever and just one person dies then. So do you let this terrible thing happen, or do you pull the, it's a classic problem in sort of moral philosophy, decades old, right? And people always debate it, and how do you do this? And it's all, it actually goes to what I was talking about, right? Which is, do you follow rules, right? Which says never murder anybody, or do you follow the outcome? Well, obviously, one person less dead is better than five, and or do you have sort of a virtue approach, which is there's to sort of think and yeah, right, do the thing that's virtuous, whatever that
but
may
no,
be.
but
Right?
the thing, if you think about it at a macro level, it's or a meta level. It's like saying that actually, this technology is supposed to be here to. Apparently, technology was always, in my view, was here to help the human race.
That's right.
So let's
Yeah,
not lose perspective of
that's right.
actually there's supposed to be a hierarchy here. The
Yeah.
danger with it in the future is that when the technology becomes, more intelligent than the human race with this
Yeah.
AGI stuff that they're planning to do, then
Yeah.
how do you manage that? How the hell do you
No,
manage that?
absolutely. I mean, these are things that I talk about, right? So I mean, like with this, decades ago when I'm in college in this class, what we're talking about we're talking about theoretical things. We're talking about, if there's a self-driving car, how would we as software engineers solve the trolley problem? You know what I mean? So this horrible accident is going to happen. It's going to happen. No way out of it. How do you choose? Like, what do you do? And if you're a software engineer, and who's
Because it's
liable?
like
And
Jeopardy. It's Jeopardy, isn't it?
yeah, right. And so fast forward like several years, right? I'm interviewing students at Columbia University, right, for to join this company. I was working for Scholastic, and super smart kids, right, like, much better computer science students than I ever was. Okay, but I asked them my favorite question, and by this time Tesla's become a real thing, and this is like about a decade ago, and so I just asked them, okay, so you're a software engineer, you're working at Tesla, whatever, and I give them the trolley problem, and and everyone struggles, as they should struggle, with this question. It illustrates to me that technology is advanced, right? The things that we thought were theoretical, have become real, but our ability to deal with them, the moral consequences, haven't advanced. Like, we still struggle with that. We still need to grapple with that. And so that's one of the things that's so fascinating and disturbing to me. And then, yeah, I mean, I think my favorite writer Asimov, like he anticipated exactly what you're talking about, right? Which is, this is why he had his 3 laws of robotics, right? So a human robot will never harm a human, you know what I mean? And a robot will always obey a human as long as it doesn't conflict with that rule. And a robot will always preserve its existence as long as it doesn't, doesn't contradict those first 2 rules. And then later on, like 10 years later or something, he added a 0th rule, which is exactly what you said, which is that, the robot will act in the best interests of humanity or something like that. So saving an individual, obeying a single individual human might be, against the idea of helping humanity. So that sort of becomes the primary. Now, so one of the things that I've been sort of toying with and researching is, do we have now, like we have the laws of robotics, do we have the laws of agentics, right? Because as agents become more and more autonomous and more integrated in our lives, there will be ethical considerations that these things, I mean, they're not just like, calendaring and, doing basic things. They will be, making more and more sort of decisions, micro decisions on our behalf. And some of these have ethical considerations. And so there needs to be not just a way, but a standardized way, right? So if I have an agent from OpenAI and one
How do
from
you frame
Apple
it?
and
How
one
do you
from
frame it?
Amazon, yeah, and one from whatever company, these things, they're going to have multi-agentic, interactions. There needs to be a common ethical framework for them to operate. Otherwise, how's it going to work? So, our industry is very fixated, as it should be, on sort of immediate problems like how do they exchange information and how do they talk to each other, and that's all good, that's fine. That's the plumbing and the and as engineers, we love that, right? We love to have sort of common frameworks for things. Okay, what is the moral framework? What is the decision making framework so that these things will make decisions sort of in the same way, or will they make decisions in the same way? Because if they don't, I think that's very chaotic. I can't anticipate what that future looks like.
That is exactly the verb I was thinking when you were talking chaos.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think like this area is really, really, I think it's the most important area in all of this, right? Is to talk about AI ethics and to really kind of work and to advance work on this, because again, it is moving way faster than our ability to even understand its implications, let alone come up with good ethical frameworks for their behavior.
Well, that's a hell of a segue to finish on.
So you got me all excited on my favorite topics.
Well, no. I mean, I think it kind of says to me that actually, what I can see you coming back as a future guest, actually, just to give us an update on what's going on, because yeah, I mean, it's moving so fast, and actually, what we talked about towards the end was it's very, very important to cover that and not ignore it, and not just kind of go into this kind of wanderlust of technology for technology's sake, and lose those principles that allow you to have those Asimov levels of control, you could say, or levels of taking care of what you should do as a human race.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Ali, what an amazing episode.
No, it's been a very fun conversation. Thank you, Andrew.
So that was Ali Khan, and I'll put Ali's bio on the when I publish this. But yeah, no, much gratitude for coming on the show today.
No, thank you.
Join us
this
from
is my first ever podcast, So yeah, thank you for making it a fun, conversational, and enjoyable experience.
No, it's great. It was fantastic. It was really good. And join us from Atlanta. I think you're in Atlanta today.
Yes,
is that right?
Yep.
Atlanta, Georgia.
Yep.
There's a very busy airport there.
Oh, it is. It is.
And for anybody who wants to know more about the stuff you're doing and you're getting involved in, what's the best way of getting hold of you? Is it through the LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Yeah, you can just send me a note on LinkedIn. But yeah, always happy to hear from people and talk about interesting things. So yeah,
that's cool. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Have a great day. Take care.